Hello there, people of the internet. I have myself an 1886 Lebel. This is a rifle that I've been wanting for a very, very long time. This is the first militarily adopted smokeless powder rifle. Adopted in 1886 by the French. The French were the ones who came up with smokeless powder, although it did not take the rest of the world very long to follow along with the French influence of that smokeless powder system. So around the late 1800s, countries were wanting to adopt bolt-action repeating rifles to replace their breech-loading single shots, and combine that with the smokeless powder that all these countries were now adopting, and you had yourself a cutting-edge, technologically advanced rifle system. So if you like things like this right here, really old guns, then subscribe to the channel because you are among the right crowd. I also really, really like old guns exactly like this. I'm sure somebody's going to go into the comments and they're going to say, French rifle, never fired, only dropped once. Well, this one has obviously seen some very, very, very difficult times. This particular one is a 1912 production, so it would have seen use in World War I. And after that, probably saw use in World War II. And after that, well, this particular one came out of Africa, and God only knows what it saw over there. I do know that the bore is completely shot out, so I'm going to have to counterbore this thing. So I do know that it saw quite a bit of use over there in Africa, so it's definitely been fired plenty of times. Anyway, I was showing this off to a buddy of mine. I was like, hey, check out my 1886 Lebel rifle, literally the first modern rifle. This is the first gun, militarily speaking, that uses smokeless powder. Before this, everybody was using black powder. And you know what he said? He said, what's the significance in that? Why does that matter? What's the difference between smokeless powder and black powder? Why is that so important? So I figured I'd go ahead and I'd make an entire YouTube video talking about the importance of smokeless powder and just how significant of a change this rifle was being upgraded from black powder to smokeless powder. So before we get started, I want to go ahead and say that I'm sure you guys have noticed this is not my usual recording spot. I no longer have access to my range, and I would love to shoot this thing. So if you want to help me get out to a range, then down in the description below, you're going to find Patreon and Utreon, or I'm selling t-shirts, merch store. Go get yourself a t-shirt. That'll definitely support the cause, or you could do a one-time donation through the t-shirt store. So all of that being said, what exactly is the significance in smokeless powder? Why was everybody absolutely scrambling for smokeless powder? What made this make black powder obsolete overnight? That's a lizard. That's a huge freaking lizard that just crawled inside. Hold on a second, guys. It's like the size of an iguana. Jeez Louise, this guy's huge. My God. Alright. Woohoo! This guy's so big, and boy does he bite hard. Look at the size of this one. Not very often you see them this large. Alright, let me step outside and let this one go. Alright, I have returned. Ow, my thumb hurts. So, where was I before we were so rudely interrupted? I think I was ranting about just how significant smokeless powder actually was. Smokeless powder made black powder literally obsolete overnight. As soon as the French showed up with their smokeless powder, everybody was like, oh my God, the French have smokeless powder and repeating rifles. We need to do something, and we need to do it right now. That's why all countries were basically scrambling to adopt this technology. So whenever it comes to black powder, most countries that were using black powder, I say most of them because there were some exceptions, but most were using like single shot breech loading rifles, and their black powder cartridges were oftentimes very large calibers, like upwards of 10 to 12, oftentimes bigger than that, millimeters in terms of size of the caliber of the projectile that goes downrange. That's a huge caliber. And oftentimes these bullets were particularly heavy, and they wanted, well, you had to use a large caliber heavy projectiles in order to increase the amount of energy transfer onto your target, simply because black powder is not that good of a propellant. And black powder can only propel things at certain velocities. For the most part, no matter how much black powder you pack inside of one of these cartridges, typically black powder cartridges tend to only go about 1,300 to 1,500 feet per second. There are some that went a little bit faster than that, but for the most part, that was the benchmark. So black powder does not go very fast. That's why you need large, heavy bullets. So ammunition for these black powder rifles is heavy and like over encumbering. They get a lot of weight and they take up a lot of room in comparison to what we would get with smokeless powder rifles. Not only that, but black powder creates this huge plume of smoke. And you got a bunch of soldiers shooting a bunch of black powder, and now you can't see the enemy, and now you're just wasting ammunition. So yeah, the French no longer had that huge plume of smoke with their smokeless powder, and they could send a lot more lead downrange much more accurately, much more quickly. So we go from large caliber projectiles to nice small caliber projectiles. This right here is an original 8mm LaBelle cartridge, and this right here is kind of funny looking, and that's a topic for another video whenever I talk about bullet designs, which I'm sure I will down the road. But long story short, countries that adopted these smokeless powder rifle cartridges were able to adopt cartridges that were significantly smaller in diameter. This way the projectiles were going to be significantly lighter weight. They could carry more ammunition. There were just a lot of benefits to having smaller, lighter weight ammunition that was also significantly more powerful. Smokeless powder is able to launch lead at significantly higher velocities than black powder. Black powder was typically around that 1,500 or so feet per second mark. Some things went a little bit faster, but that was about the bench point, 1,500 feet per second. While smokeless powder, a full power smokeless powder round during this time period would tend to go anywhere from 2,500 to 2,800 feet per second. So significantly faster and significantly more powerful. And that increase in velocity is what allowed countries to be able to decrease the weight of the projectiles and thus decrease the amount of weight that the ammunition is going to take up, so soldiers didn't have to carry around so much weight for such little ammunition. Not only that, but that increase in velocity also dramatically increased the range of the projectiles. You have something that is going significantly faster, it's going to drop less because gravity pulls at a consistent speed. It's going to drop less because it's spending significantly less time in the air. This is one of the reasons why countries thought that combat was going to be taking place at significantly farther distances than combat actually took place at, which is why a lot of your early smokeless powder rifles have a minimum zero of like 400 yards or something like that. So not only do you have lighter weight ammunition, but it's dramatically more effective, not only in terms of power, but in terms of distance as well. You can be significantly more effective with a full power smokeless cartridge than you can with a black powder cartridge from that time period. It really was revolutionary, and you could send much more lead downrange without having to worry about huge plumes of black powder smoke stopping you from being able to see your target. If you're a hunter or something like that and you only take 1 or 2 shots, then that black powder smoke's not really a problem. But if you're on a battlefield and the battle goes on for like, a week plus at a time, and you can't see your target and you're consistently dealing with the smoke and whatnot, then you start to really see some significant advantages to having a cartridge that doesn't do that. And that is one of the biggest, that alone is one of the biggest advantages to having smokeless powder for a military force. For a civilian force, black powder is really not that big of a deal. You're probably not going to send enough lead down range to create a powder cloud, a plume of smoke that is large enough to hinder you from being able to take your next shot. But if you have entire regiments of people holding a line somewhere and sending a ridiculous amount of volley fire down range, then all of a sudden you are unable to accurately and competently shoot or even see your enemy because of that huge plume of smoke. So yeah, black powder definitely has a huge downside with that. Not only that, but the rounds are heavy and slow moving. This right here got rid of all of those problems, and this right here was the first rifle to do that. And smokeless powder was so gosh darn effective that not only did every other country in the world that was a major military force at the time period try adopting their own version of this smokeless powder with a repeating rifle that, you know, they could have a cartridge chambered in it. Not only was that a thing, but the civilian market in, like, I mean, here in the U.S., 1894 was already seeing smokeless powder on the market in the 30-30 Winchester centerfire for the Winchester 94 lever action series. So, yeah, smokeless powder took off, and it is like the primary powder that we use nowadays. Granted, we have different variations of it. We have a lot more variety than they had back in the time periods where this right here was being developed. And our smokeless powder is significantly more powerful and has significantly higher pressures than what old school smokeless powder was able to pull off for the most part. And our cartridge technology is a little bit better. Old school cartridge technology, they had big rims, and they just were not all that good of a design, with the exception of 8mm Mauser. 8mm Mauser was so ahead of its time, and that's why it's one of my all-time favorite cartridges. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Hopefully you learned something about smokeless powder and why it was so significant of a change, like a dramatic leap forward in comparison to black powder. Whenever the French showed up with these rifles, like, I would love to see the first encounter of somebody seeing the French come over and they hear gunfire and they don't see smoke, and they see the French like way off in the field over there, and suddenly they're taking like accurate fire, and you're like, oh god, we have a bunch of like single shot breech loaders, and these guys are like 5 times away from the distance of us being able to shoot them accurately, and they're making accurate shots at us. And they're not. There's no smoke over there. They can see us. At that point, I'd be like, all right, everybody fire all of your ammunition, make a huge smoke cloud so they can't see us, and let's get the hell out of here. That's probably what I would do. Okay, I think I've rambled on long enough. Thanks for watching, folks. I do appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you guys on the next episode.
Since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.